second week after invasion, I volunteered at the Al-Adan hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
You have this teenager, this girl, saying she witnessed this, that Iraqi soldiers came into Kuwait and ripped babies out of Kuwaiti incubators. But she was only referred to as Nayirah at the time of the testimony. It wasn't Nayirah al-Sabah, so you would know that she is the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador who also testified in that hearing.
Correct. That's all part of the propaganda plan, is to maintain her anonymity, to protect her and her family against reprisals in Kuwait. That was the cover story. But, of course, nobody bothered to try to find out who she really was. They just bought the story hook, line, and sinker, even though at the time there were a couple of human rights investigators who were becoming suspicious. I got onto the trail after the war, unfortunately, and was able to run down what really had happened, which was that Hill Knowlton selected her as a persuasive witness to this atrocity, and it was all part of a campaign to turn Saddam Hussein, at least in the public consciousness, into Adolf Hitler. And the feeling was that they couldn't sell the Gulf War without this. In other words, they had to cheat to win. And that's what interests me about the eulogies for George Bush. He's being presented now as this paragon of kind of WASP respectability and integrity, old school, when in fact he had a violent side to him, a very angry and violent and ruthless side to him. And when you see him doing the propaganda, using the Hill and Knowlton disinformation, you see a side of a politician that's kind of ugly. And we're still, as Juan said, we're still living with the consequences of our having placed troops in Saudi Arabia, because that's what sets off bin Laden. It's clear that numerous representatives and senators cited the baby incubator atrocity, which was false. It never happened. As a reason for voting for the Gulf War resolution. In other words, these are people who said, well, look, we could figure out other ways to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, economic sanctions, negotiations. There was a feeling that this was about oil. It wasn't about principle, even though Bush posed it as a matter of international law. But these people said, finally, look, if he's really Hitler, if he's really capable of having an army that slaughters, and it got to hundreds of babies by the time Amnesty International gave its official seal of approval to the story.
Now that's
and I
it was inflated.
That's
it got
very,
even bigger.
Very important about Amnesty International and the role that it played. It wasn't just Nayirah.
It wasn't just Nayirah. Human Rights Watch fell for it. They were neutral officially, but Amnesty International actually put the number over 300 babies. There weren't that many incubators in Kuwait City hospitals. Now, if you want to go back over the record, you'll see how badly the media, how badly the press failed in all this.
Well, I remember my newspaper, the New York Daily News, had a front page. They killed the babies, and so the media uncritically accepted this story without any kind of check.
Diplomatic opportunities began to crop up from very quickly, within a week or two. By the end of August, there were several that looked pretty significant, including Iraqi offers that were regarded by high U.S. officials as serious and negotiable. The offers at that time basically had to do with, as you've all heard plenty of times by now, with two uninhabited islands in the Gulf and with a particular oil field, the Rumaila oil field. This oil field's about 98% inside Iraq, crosses a disputed border, and Iraq wanted control of the whole thing. The uninhabited islands, they have to do with access to the Gulf. The imperial settlement imposed by England was set up in such a way that Iraq is basically landlocked, and access to the Gulf would involve control over those two islands. There could be lots of ways of working this out, leasing or whatever. Much harder problems than that have been settled through negotiations, and a settlement along those lines looked feasible. Was it feasible? Well, we don't know, because the United States rejected it flat out of hand. The only way you can find out if a proposal is serious is to pursue it, obviously. And rejecting it out of hand was a way of ensuring that it wouldn't be serious. In fact, it was probably an expression of fear that it might be serious. The New York Times had a pretty remarkable story. Thomas Friedman, the diplomatic correspondent, which that means essentially the State Department spokesman at the Times. That's the nature of that office. He had quite a perceptive article, I thought. I think it was around August 22nd, in which he said that the administration wants to prevent the diplomatic track from being pursued because of fear that pursuit of the diplomatic track might defuse the crisis. This was his words, by offering a few token gains for Saddam Hussein, namely, and then he mentioned them, a couple of uninhabited islands and some, border rectification. And you don't want to diffuse the crisis when you can have a neat war with, a couple 100,000 people killed, apparently.